Welcome back to Are You Annie, the podcast that speaks to the women who have walked through fire and come out even stronger. I'm Kyle Hackley, your host. I'm an attorney, mother, grandmother, and author of Undercurrent. Today we're diving in deeper to a topic that we talked about yesterday. A topic that so many survivors of narcissistic abuse know all too well. It's narcissistic rage. Before we begin, I want to remind you that I'm simply a woman who is passionate about shedding light on narcissistic abuse and creating a space where affected women can be finally heard. This isn't a therapy session. This is a forum, a place where women who have suffered at the hands of a narcissist can find validation, strength, and hopefully reclaim their voices. You will not be silenced here because your story matters. Last time we talked about Santino's reckless, white-knuckled rage, the moment he accelerated toward that deer, knowing Annie was terrified in the passenger seat and knowing she was absolutely powerless. If you're new here, Annie is a protagonist of Undercurrent, a woman who fought to escape the grip of her narcissistic husband. And in that moment, trapped in a speeding car, Annie saw the truth. This was never just about anger. This was about power. For Annie, that crash was a turning point. It was the moment she knew she had to leave her husband. She did. But here's the thing. Leaving an abuser doesn't mean that the rage ends. In many ways, at least for Annie, the battle was just beginning. We tend to think of narcissistic rage as explosive, yelling, breaking things, slamming doors, and yes, often that's exactly what it is. And it was certainly Annie's experience. But rage takes different forms, and not all of them are loud. Some of them are just as dangerous, just as destructive, but they come in silence, in manipulation, in control that doesn't need to raise its voice to be deadly. There's explosive rage, the kind Annie saw in Santino behind the wheel, reckless, impulsive, destructive, and possibly deadly. Cold rage, the silent treatment, that icy glare, the withdrawal of affection like a punishment, manipulative rage, the outburst followed by gaslighting. Look what you made me do. I wouldn't have gotten so angry if you hadn't. Another tact right out of Santino's playbook where he would combine rage and blame. And then there's targeted rage, the one that makes outsiders think that they're not really so bad, and that's because they save all of the worst rage for the people they control. Even though Annie left her husband, she would soon learn that Santino's rage wasn't just an in-the-moment explosion. It had aftershocks. Santino's rage did not end when Annie left. Well, at first, Annie thought she was free. She and her daughter moved into their own small little apartment, a space that was finally theirs. They felt safe. And for the first time in a long time, Annie felt she could breathe. She didn't care that she no longer had that lovely 3-bedroom home. Being free from Santino was worth sharing a 1-bedroom apartment with her daughter. Annie thought she was done, but Santino, he wasn't done, because narcissists don't let go. When they lose control, they don't accept it. They fight to get back. And Santino's fight took many different forms. At one point, Santino resorts to the courts. He wants to cut Annie as deeply as he can and hurt her to the core. What he did is he threatened to take full custody of their daughter. That custody battle wasn't about that little girl. It was about the power. It was about making Annie suffer. It was Santino's desire to keep Annie tethered to him through legal red tape. Then came the lies, the rumors, the phone calls to Annie's family. Annie's actions in leaving her husband had already alienated her from a family who didn't believe in divorce. The tendency was to take sides with Santino, the so-called wonderful man whom she left. So when Santino told Annie's family things like, she's unstable, she just makes things up. She's keeping my daughter from me. He was controlling the narrative to paint a picture of himself to make sure that he was the one who looked like the victim. And if she ever tried to speak out about what really happened, he wanted to make sure that nobody would believe her. And certainly his ego wouldn't allow him to let anybody believe that he was to blame for any of this. And then there were times that she would feel his eyes on her, car parked down the street, the unexpected and unwanted knock at the door, showing up at her workplace and making things uncomfortable for her. Subtle enough that she couldn't press any charges. But in reality, she knew he was stalking her. And then, of course, I have to say, I miss you, I never meant to hurt you, let's talk and work this out. But that's how a narcissist operates, because they don't want love. They want control. And if they can't have it through intimidation, they'll try it through guilt, through just enough of a glimpse of the person you thought they were, who they used to be, to make you second guess yourself. Survivors of narcissistic rage don't just walk away unscathed. The fear lingers. The self-doubt lingers. Even in safety, the hypervigilance remains, waiting for the next explosion, the next attack, even if it doesn't come. Annie would wake up some nights in a panic, feeling like she was still in that car, still barreling down towards something she couldn't stop, because that's what abuse does. It rewires your brain to anticipate the storm even before it forms. The worst part is the guilt, because even after everything Santino had done, Annie still found herself wondering, what if he was right? Could I be wrong about some of this? Maybe I did overreact. That's the grip of an abuser, and that's why breaking free is more than just physical escape. It's rewiring everything you were conditioned to believe. So what do? How do you protect yourself when the rage doesn't stop at the front door? Here's what Annie learned, what I imagine so many other survivors learned. No contact or low contact. Cut them off completely if possible. I know that is a tough one, especially if you share custody. So that can be a very touchy matter that may require the counsel of an attorney. Annie sought legal counsel several times throughout her journey. You can use a gray rock method. Give them nothing. No emotional reactions, no engagement, no supply. You are a gray rock. Boring, unresponsive, untouchable. And document everything. If they send you a message or a note, keep it. If they make threats, make a note of it and report it. If they show up, you take notes, because proof is power. And build a support system. I know that this might be easier said than done, but whenever possible, seek out a therapist who's trained in narcissistic abuse. Support groups can help, even friends that you just trust to the core. And the reason it can be that people who see the truth can remind you when you're being gaslit. Believe in yourself. You know your experience is real, and that's enough. Rage is a narcissist's most powerful weapon, but the moment you stop taking responsibility for his emotions, the moment you refuse to absorb his anger, you take away his power. It's not easy, and it's fairly clean. But every time you choose yourself over control, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. And if you are in a situation like Annie's, please know you do not have to do this alone. Leaving is hard. Staying away can be even harder. But there are people who will help you, who will listen, who will remind you that your story is real, your pain is valid, and your healing is possible. Thank you for listening to the AreYouAnnie podcast. If this episode speaks to you at all, I would ask you share it with someone who may need to hear it, because when Annie tells her story, that's when the circle of healing can begin. Together, I want the Annies of the world to remind each other that they are absolutely not alone. And before you go, please hit the subscribe button. You'll be helping me to reach the next Annie, a woman who needs to know that she isn't alone, that she is not crazy, that she is strong. And one more thing. I want you to be tenacious. I want you to never give up on what's important to you. Thank you so much for listening.